As John packed up for his 4-day business trip, he tried his best to reassure his wife, making promises he hoped he could keep. "Emmy, I'll finish up with this project, and I'll be back right in time for your birthday. We'll go out to dinner, celebrate, just you and me. Everything's gonna be fine, babe," he said, flashing her that familiar smile. Though his nerves were definitely kicking in, he had to present at the ministry, a big deal for his career. So even though he hated leaving her, he knew this trip was something he couldn't pass up. The whole drive down in his car would give him time to focus, and it was easier than catching a flight. "All right, I guess. Just hope you really do come back when you say," she replied, her voice a little more cold than warm. She wasn't always thrilled when John left, but at the same time, part of her liked the space. It wasn't like she hated him being gone. In fact, she relished those moments of freedom when the house felt quieter, the routine a little looser. They'd been married for 5 years now, and though they tried, they hadn't been able to have kids yet. That was another story altogether. As soon as the door shut and she heard the car pull away, she grabbed her phone and quickly fired off a message to Anthony. "He's gone for a work trip. We've got 4 days, plenty of time to celebrate," she typed and hit send. Emmy and Anthony had been seeing each other for about a year now, both knowing full well they were playing with fire. Neither of them were exactly single. Emmy had her husband, and while they'd been together for years, things had become, well, complicated. No kids, no spark, just routine. Meanwhile, Anthony was a family man with a wife and a little daughter, making things even messier. But none of that stopped them. Their secret meetings were Emmy's way of escaping the dullness her life had become. Anthony brought excitement, passion, and a thrill she hadn't felt in a long time. She craved the adventure, the rush. And while John was a good guy, he just couldn't give her what she needed anymore. They first met at some city event, one of those gatherings where journalists mingle, trading gossip and ideas, looking for that next big story. Both Emmy and Anthony were reporters, which immediately gave them tons to talk about. Common ground, shared interests, deep convos about politics, world events, pop culture. It was like they were vibing from the start. Emmy was the first to notice him. She kept glancing his way, almost studying him, her gaze lingering longer than normal. There was no denying it, she was interested, and it didn't take long for Anthony to catch on. He felt her eyes on him, and soon found himself curious about her too. She had this confident, magnetic presence that made her stand out in the crowd. He racked his brain, trying to place her. "Man, I've seen this girl somewhere before," he thought, his mind racing. "What paper does she write for?" After that, it was pretty much a wrap. They introduced themselves, started chatting, and it didn't take long before things between them escalated. It was like some invisible force was pushing them together. Before they knew it, they were wrapped up in something far more complicated than either of them had planned. They started meeting in hotels, planning everything ahead with texts and calls. Anthony would make excuses to his wife, while Emmy timed their rendezvous perfectly with John's business trips. When John was out of town, their home became the perfect hideout for her and Anthony. Emmy didn't even feel guilty. In her mind, it felt almost natural, like this double life was something she was always meant to live. Her marriage to John was stable, but emotionally empty. John was so wrapped up in his job that he barely noticed how disconnected they'd become. He truly loved Emmy, and he was a great husband, always caring, always supportive. But he was so focused on his career that he couldn't see the cracks forming in their relationship. He trusted her completely, never once suspecting that she might be cheating. That trust gave Emmy all the freedom she needed, and she didn't hesitate to use it. The only dark cloud over their marriage was the fact that they still didn't have kids. They talked about it more than once, and had even started making plans. If Emmy didn't get pregnant within the next year, they'd go to a clinic and explore fertility options. John believed they could fix it, that they still had a bright future ahead of them. After all, life moves on, and nowadays you can fix almost anything if you really want to. Anthony called Emmy while she was finally home after a long day at work. His voice came through a bit muffled, and he got straight to the point, telling her they wouldn't be able to meet for the next couple of days. He was stuck at his parents' place in the countryside and wouldn't be back for 2 days. "Oh, Anthony, that's such a bummer. We could have had, 3 whole days together," Emmy sighed, a bit annoyed, not even considering that Anthony had his own family and commitments. But that wasn't her style. She never really thought about other people's situations. As long as everything was good for her, that's all that mattered. Anthony, sensing her frustration, stayed cool and replied, "I'll be back the day before your birthday. I'll come by around 3 p.m. Does that work for you?" In a flash, Emmy's mood flipped, and she chirped happily, "Yes, of course, That's perfect. I can't wait. I'll ask my boss to let me leave early. John's not coming back until the next day, in the evening. Her voice was full of excitement. The thought of their secret meeting had her giddy, and she was already picturing how it would go down. The day before her birthday arrived, and Emmy was all over the place. She was rushing to tidy up her desk, checking the clock every few minutes, feeling the pressure. Time was crawling by so slowly. She'd already asked her editor for an early leave, and now she was just waiting. Anthony was supposed to come straight from the countryside, and she knew his call could come any minute now. Finally, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it, her heart skipping a beat, thinking it was Anthony. But when she glanced at the screen, it wasn't his name flashing. Instead, it read, Ilya Sergeyevich. Ugh, seriously? Emmy groaned. Rolling her eyes to the ceiling, she answered in a tone dripping with annoyance. Yes, Ilya Sergeyevich. No, Ilya Sergeyevich, I can't. I'll finish it tomorrow, I swear. She was trying to keep it polite, but she couldn't help but let her irritation slip through. Yeah, I've got things going on today. I told you already. Yes, I'll finish it tomorrow, for sure. I promise. Fine, no promises. She let out a frustrated sigh and finally hung up the phone. Taking a deep breath, she felt the tension start to ease from her shoulders. Now she just had to wait for the call she really wanted. Her coworkers, who had been sitting with her in the office, shot her a knowing smile once she hung up the phone. Well, Emmy, barely got rid of the boss, huh? He's such a pain once he sticks to you. You can't shake him off, one of the girls teased, laughing openly. Emmy chuckled, waving it off like it was no big deal. Tell me about it. The guy just won't let go. Like, he already said I could leave, but knew he had to dig for more, she said with a roll of her eyes, frustrated as she kept shuffling through the piles of papers on her desk. It looked like complete chaos, but Emmy always knew where everything was. Except for today. Today, nothing was going right, and she was getting more anxious by the second. She couldn't find her car keys anywhere. Where the hell are they? She muttered under her breath, her fingers digging into her purse as she rummaged through it like a madwoman. She dumped out her makeup, loose change, and receipts, but no keys. Her stress levels spiked as she felt time slipping away from her. Damn it, she cursed softly, patting down the pockets of her coat in a last-ditch effort. Finally, she felt the cold metal of the keys buried deep in a tiny side pocket of her bag. Relief washed over her, and with a triumphant smile, she waved goodbye to her coworkers. All right, see you guys tomorrow, she called out before darting out of the office like a whirlwind, confident and fast-paced as always. At 30, Emmy was the kind of woman who turned heads. Slim, with long, shiny brunette hair and sharp, striking features, she had an undeniable presence. Her inner fire, relentless ambition, and endless energy drew people in. She had a knack for getting what she wanted, at work, in life, and of course, in her personal relationships. That determination made her a valuable asset in the newsroom, and the higher-ups knew it. Sliding into the driver's seat of her car, she glanced at the clock. Time was ticking. First off, she had to swing by the restaurant to pick up the food she'd ordered. There was no way she was cooking tonight. Who had the time for that? Plus, why bother when you can get whatever you want with a quick call? Second, Anthony was already on his way to her place, and she had to be ready for him. A bath, flawless makeup, and the perfect outfit. Everything had to be on point. Emmy couldn't afford to look basic, especially not tonight. This meeting was a big deal, and she wanted to blow him away. Every detail mattered. She pressed the gas pedal a little harder, picking up speed. Her mind was buzzing with thoughts of the upcoming evening. She'd planned it all out to the last second, and the last thing she needed was for anything to go off track. Anthony wasn't just any guy to her. This affair gave her the thrill, the freedom, the excitement that she was missing in her day-to-day life with John. She reveled in the rush it gave her, and she wasn't about to give it up anytime soon. Emmy glanced at herself in the mirror, fixing her hair one last time. Weird, she thought to herself. Why did Anthony decide to come over to my place this time instead of the usual hotel? But she shrugged it off quickly. Whatever, we've got a whole day ahead of us. John said his presentation's tomorrow morning, and he'll be busy till noon. With the drive taking over 3 hours, he won't be back until evening, she reassured herself, a sly smile creeping across her face. Everything was going according to plan. Emmy had it all mapped out down to the smallest detail, and she was crushing it. No rush. She had already picked up the food she'd ordered from the restaurant, had time for a relaxing bath, and slipped into a stunning dress that highlighted her best features. She was ready. As she glanced at her reflection one last time, the doorbell rang. With a quick tug on her robe, she wrapped it over her dress and made her way to the door. Anthony stood there with a warm smile, holding an enormous bouquet of roses. Emmy's face lit up as her heart skipped a beat. Her eyes gleamed with excitement. "Hey, baby," Anthony greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "Finally got to see you. Man, I missed you." Emmy beamed back, but something felt off. She glanced down, expecting to see a gift. Anthony never showed up empty-handed. "Emmy, babe, I'm so sorry," he said, reading her expression. "I didn't get the chance to grab you a gift. I was in such a rush to get here. Didn't want to waste any time shopping. My mom's been sick back in the village, so I had to help her out with some firewood and stuff around the house. But I promise, I'll make it up to you." Anthony had been head over heels for Emmy since the first time he laid eyes on her at that city event. Their initial attraction quickly turned into something deeper. She was unlike any other woman he'd met, full of energy, passion, and fire. She was vibrant, alive in a way that his wife just wasn't. His wife was quieter, more reserved, and lately, completely absorbed with taking care of their constantly sick daughter. Emmy, though, she made him feel alive again. Every time they met, Emmy brought back a spark to his life that had been missing for a long time. Their affair wasn't just about physical attraction. It was about the thrill, the excitement, the way she made him forget everything else. It was like stepping into a different world, a world where nothing else mattered but them. And Anthony craved that world every chance he got, longing for these moments that pulled him away from his mundane reality. But the craziest part? Anthony never even thought about divorcing his wife. Everything was working out just fine for him, especially since Emmy had her own husband too. They never brought up the topic of splitting up. Why bother when both of them were happy with how things were? They met whenever they could, no strings attached, just enjoying each other's company. And Emmy wasn't looking to leave her husband either. John was talented, made good money, and loved her to bits. If they ever had a kid, she knew he'd be the best dad. But still, she couldn't quite put her finger on why she was cheating on him with Anthony. I mean, John was tall, handsome, always dressed sharp, and had that whole good guy vibe going on. So what was it? Maybe Emmy was just acting out because life felt too predictable, or maybe she craved that thrill, walking on the edge of danger. But honestly, she didn't really care enough to dig deep into the why. She was living her best life and loving every second of it. When Emmy and Anthony hung out, time just slowed down. It was always chill, no stress, just vibes. And today was no different. Anthony was being extra affectionate, more than usual, and Emmy, missing him like crazy, was all in. Soft music played in the background. The table was set with expensive wine, fruits, and chocolates. It was like the perfect scene from a movie, as if the outside world didn't even exist. Every moment with him was soaked in romance. Anthony, with his charm and undivided attention, made Emmy feel like the only woman in the world. She savored every touch, every word, every glance he threw her way. And Anthony? He felt like he was on cloud nine being with her. These rare moments were like a breath of fresh air for both of them, something new and exciting that shook up their everyday lives filled with routine and responsibilities. John was an architect, and not just any architect. He was the guy everyone in the office relied on when things got tough. Meticulous, dependable, and always paying attention to every little detail. That was John. His bosses respected him, his colleagues trusted him, and when he got his hands on a project, you could be sure it was in the best possible hands. John wasn't just a worker. He was the go-to guy when something big needed to be done right. This time, he had been working on something huge, a project he had poured months of his life into. It was his baby, and now it was time for the big presentation at the ministry. Everything had been prepped, polished, and fine-tuned to perfection. He'd been talking to his wife, Emmy, the day before, promising her he'd be home in time for her birthday. That was important to him, but out of nowhere, a change of plans hit him like a curveball. His boss called with a sudden update. The presentation was moved up a day. Higher-ups decided they wanted to see it sooner, and everything was already set. For John, this meant one thing. He could wrap things up early and surprise Emmy by getting home before her birthday. "Hey, John, the boss moved your presentation to tomorrow, right after lunch," his project manager said, sounding pretty upbeat about it. "So you can knock it out early and head home. Everything's good to go." John grinned. This was better than he'd expected. "Man, that's awesome. I told my wife I'd be back for her birthday, but now I'll get there a day early. Couldn't have asked for better timing. Glad you're on board. Be ready for 2 p.m. tomorrow. Don't be late." The next day, the room was packed with big shots. These weren't just any suits. These were the guys who made things happen. Power oozed from their every move, and John could feel the weight of their stares. But he wasn't fazed. He'd prepared for this. He knew every inch of that project like the back of his hand. Looking sharp and confident, he walked into the room and started his pitch. Everyone in the room was tuned in. Nods of approval, focused gazes. He could tell they liked what they were hearing. This was his moment. Months of hard work, endless revisions, and long nights. It all came down to this. When he finished, they didn't just clap. They stood up, came over to shake his hand, give him pats on the back. He'd nailed it. His project was a hit, and now, with all the stress behind him, John was finally ready to go home. That was the sweet reward. Not just the success, but the chance to be with Emmy sooner than planned. I never had any doubt, John. You nailed it, man. His boss congratulated him, gripping his hand firmly. Get ready for a fat bonus. He raised his finger with a knowing smile. Real, nice one. John felt the satisfaction wash over him like a wave. He'd done it. After months of hard work, the success felt sweet. He quickly gathered up all his blueprints and paperwork, carefully tucking them away into his briefcase. Then he made his way back to the hotel, where his bags were already packed and waiting. Throwing his luggage into the trunk of his car, he glanced at his watch and grinned. If everything goes smoothly, I'll be home by 10 p.m., he muttered to himself, already mapping out the route in his head. Gotta hit the mall first, pick up a gift for Emmy. John knew he had to make this special. Emmy's birthday was coming up, and he was determined to surprise her with something unforgettable. Time was tight, but he wasn't about to show up empty-handed. She had no idea he'd be back early, and that thought alone made the surprise even sweeter. He stepped into the mall, moving fast but with purpose. In no time, he had everything he needed. A fancy bottle of wine, a box of gourmet chocolates, and of course, a massive bouquet of fresh roses. But the real showstopper? A delicate gold brooch with 3 sparkling diamonds, tucked safely inside a tiny velvet box. He slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket like a prized possession, knowing Emmy would love it. As he walked out of the mall, arms full of gifts, he checked the time again. He was cutting it close, but it didn't matter. Tonight was going to be perfect. Almost slipping into the driver's seat, he suddenly remembered the bouquet he'd left on the hood of the car. Cursing under his breath, he dashed back, grabbed the flowers, and finally hit the road. Music played softly in the background, and the rain started to drizzle, but nothing could dampen his mood now. He was on top of the world, imagining the look on Emmy's face when he walked through the door with all the surprises. She has no clue I'm coming home tonight, he thought, feeling a surge of excitement. No calls, no texts. It's gonna be one hell of a surprise. John was feeling good. His project had been a success, and now he was on his way home to see the woman he loved, armed with gifts and the perfect surprise. John pulled up to the building, parking the car smoothly near the entrance. Their apartment windows faced the other side, way up on the 11th floor. He got out, juggling the flowers and wine in one hand while locking the car with the other. As he walked towards the entrance, his mind was racing with thoughts of the surprise he had planned for Emmy. She wasn't expecting him tonight, and that made it all the more exciting. He hit the elevator button, feeling his heart speed up a little. When he finally reached their apartment, he paused at the door for a second, wondering, is Emmy asleep? Or maybe she's still up, waiting for me. He decided not to knock and just let himself in quietly with his key, hoping to catch her off guard in the best way. The door creaked open, and he stepped into the hallway, flicking on the light. As he bent down to take off his shoes, he froze for a moment. There was soft music playing from the bedroom. His first thought was, she must have left the TV on. But then his eyes landed on something that sent a chill down his spine. A pair of men's sneakers that definitely weren't his. He stood up, a knot forming in his stomach. Something was very wrong. Without thinking, John quickly moved toward the bedroom, the door slightly ajar. As he peeked inside, the sight that greeted him felt like a punch to the gut. Emmy was lying on the bed, casually laughing with another man beside her. They were both looking at something on her phone, completely unaware of his presence. John just stood there in the doorway, holding the wine, chocolates, and flowers. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. For a few agonizing seconds, he couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was like time had slowed down, every second dragging out in painful clarity. Then, almost out of nowhere, he found his voice. It came out calm, colder than he expected, but laced with sharp irony. Well, he said with a bitter smirk. Didn't see this one coming, huh? The classic scene. Husband comes home early from a business trip, and what does he find? Emmy shot up from the bed, her face going pale as she realized what was happening. She stammered, her voice shaky. "John, wait. I can explain. It's not what it looks like." But he didn't want to hear any of it. Turning around, John walked out of the bedroom, the sound of her voice fading behind him as he headed for the door. "There's nothing to explain," he muttered under his breath. "It's crystal clear." With that, he slammed the door behind him, leaving everything else behind. Turns out, it's that simple. That's how cheating happens. You think life's all normal, everything's in place, and then, boom, your whole world crashes down in seconds. It felt like someone had pulled the rug from under John, leaving him falling with no way to stop. The pain, the disgust, it all hit him hard. He was in such a bad place emotionally, like his chest was caving in. But the one thing he knew for sure was that walking away was the best thing he could have done. If he'd stayed there even a minute longer, who knows what might have happened. While riding the elevator down, John was shaking. His heart was pounding so loud in his ears, it felt like it might burst right out of his chest. The elevator moved painfully slow, almost mocking him, giving him too much time to think about what he just witnessed. When the doors finally opened, he stepped out, still holding the flowers and bottle of wine. The symbols of what was supposed to be a romantic evening, now just reminders of his heartbreak. Without thinking twice, he tossed the flowers onto the window ledge on the first floor, as if discarding the weight of everything that had just happened. With quick strides, he made his way to the car. As soon as he slammed the door shut, he jammed the keys into the ignition and hit the gas, speeding toward his mom's house on the other side of town. He couldn't be there any longer, in that apartment where his whole world had just shattered. He was trembling with hurt, with anger, with a rage that burned inside him like a wildfire. His mind was spinning on repeat. How long has this been going on? How many times has she lied to me, and I never noticed? Emmy, how could I have been so blind? These thoughts swirled in his head, poisoning his mind as he drove, each mile dragging out in what felt like forever. After that night, everything changed. John wasted no time. He filed for divorce almost immediately, knowing there was no going back. Emmy moved out of the apartment on her own. She knew she had no claim to anything there. The apartment was his. He'd bought it long before they ever met. It was his home, and now it was time for her to go. As for Anthony, the guy who was the catalyst for all of this, he drifted away from her, too. It was over. Not just the relationship, but everything that connected them. John couldn't help but feel regret, but not for the breakup. No, it was the time that was lost. Time he could have spent building a real family, raising kids. He wanted that, more than anything. He wanted a real, solid family. A couple of kids, maybe 3. Despite all the pain, he hadn't given up hope. He still believed that one day he'd meet someone and build that life he dreamed of. One day, his hopes of a loving family and happy home would become real.